There was a most peculiar era in Earth's history. For most life forms, the ocean is dangerous and the land is a safe place. Samea so Eurygia. However, at that time, everything was the opposite. The land was a world of monsters, armed with fangs and muscles, while the sea was rather a quiet sanctuary. About 260 million years ago, during the late Permian period, the Pangea epoch, at that time, all the continents on Earth were joined together to form the massive Pangea. The sky was burning red, and the air was suffocatingly hot. Today, let's journey together to that strange planet, Earth, when the land was more dangerous than the sea. At that time, Earth looked completely different from now. A day was only 22 hours long, and the moon orbited much closer to Earth than it does now. Most astonishing of all was the geography. Almost all of Earth's land was clustered into one massive supercontinent called Pangea. To the east of this supercontinent, where Africa, South America, North America, Antarctica, Australia, and Europe were all connected, lay the Tethys Sea. And to the west of Pangea was a vast ocean called Pantalassa, which was twice the size of the current Pacific Ocean and covered more than 60% of the Earth's surface. The land during this period was dominated by a creature called Gorgonopsid. When its fossils were first discovered in 1876, paleontologists found its appearance so chilling that they named it after the monster Gorgon from Greek mythology. These creatures with long, narrow skulls and razor-sharp fangs were among the first saber-toothed predators in evolutionary history. Gorgonopsids were not mammals. They belonged to a group called monotremes, which were closer to mammals than reptiles, but strictly speaking, they were neither. However, there was no doubt about their hunting abilities. Until the mid-Permian period, Gorgonopsids were small animals no larger than a human foot, but in the late Permian period, the situation changed as their competitors, the Denisovarians, went extinct. The Gorgonopsids, which took the vacant spot at the top of the ecosystem, began to rapidly grow larger. The result was Inostrancevia. This monster, measuring 3.5 meters in length and weighing 450 kilograms, these massive teeth were not just long, they were curved and serrated, optimized for slicing through flesh. A single bite could cause massive bleeding and inflict fatal damage to vital organs. Paleontologists speculate that Inostrancevia hunted in a manner similar to Smilodon. It would bite the prey's neck, then retreat and wait until the prey collapsed from bleeding and shock. Both were terrible deaths. What was more frightening was the range of Inostrantsevia's habitats. Fossils have been found in a vast area covering present-day Africa, Asia, Europe, and Russia. From the warm floodplains of South Africa to the cold deserts of Russia, they were extremely adaptable predators. Some paleontologists suggest that individuals living in the cold regions of Russia might have had fur. However, this has not been confirmed yet. Even Inostrancevia alone was threatening enough, but they were not alone. In the late Permian period, dozens of other Gorgonopsid species lived. In the European region of Russia, the small species Protosuchus and the medium-sized species Sogorgon coexisted. Regardless of size, Gorgonopsids exerted complete dominance in most ecosystems. However, the situation was most extreme in South Africa. The entire subfamily of Gorgonopsids called Rubiginae lived here. They evolved into a giant lineage independently, separate from Inostrancevia. Rubiginae had sturdy skulls and deeply serrated teeth, and on average they were the largest group of Gorgonopsids. Among them, Rubigia atrox was the most impressive. It reached a length of 3 meters, and the skull alone accounted for 15% of the total body length. This skull was extremely thick and had bony protrusions, appearing to be designed for capturing and biting powerful large prey. Interestingly, the bite force of Rubidia was about 750 newtons, approximately 20% stronger than that of a wolf. However, the issue was not the strength, but the teeth. Those sharp teeth easily pierced through flesh and tough skin. Rubigia atrox was not alone. It lived with 9 genera belonging to the same suborder, ranging in size from medium to large. Moreover, since an Austransevia also existed in South Africa, it is highly likely that these 2 giant predators coexisted in the same region. If 2 apex predators of similar size and build shared the same hunting grounds, conflict would have been inevitable. The land of the late Permian was literally the planet of the gorgonopsids, but it wasn't only the gorgonopsids that were dangerous. There was another group called the Therocephaeans. They were also synapsids and looked similar to gorgonopsids, but had some differences. Therocephaeans had broader and deeper skulls, with smaller and straighter teeth. The body was shorter and more compact, but the biggest difference was diversity. Various species were found across Russia, Antarctica, Africa, and China. Some Therocephaeans were. There is also the possibility that they had venom. The Eucrita melanometus and Ipiostiga, which are the size of a dog, are such cases, and if true, they would be the first tetrapods to evolve venom. Some species were semi-aquatic, while others were fully terrestrial animals that haunted large prey. The most notable among them was the Moschups. The Moschups was a predator with a body the size of a jaguar and a head as large as a lion's. The disproportionately large head suggested a powerful bite, and it was filled with sharp, cone-shaped teeth. Paleontologists believed that Moschups would grasp its prey with powerful forelimbs and then deliver a fatal blow with sharp teeth and strong jaws. According to the fossil record, Moschups was one of the most common Therocephalians in the late Permian period and, in certain environments, even replaced Gorgonopsians as the apex predator. There were also larger Therocephalians than Moschups. A representative example is Megawiptos, which reached a length of 3 meters. Megawiptos, the largest theropsid known to date, was found to have eaten large dicynodonts through fossilized excrement. Some studies have suggested the possibility of venom glands and ducts in the skull of Megawiptos. However, this claim is controversial due to the poor fossil condition of the prey. Even with the gorgonopsids and Therocephaeans being sufficiently threatening, there were many other predators on land. There was the primitive reptile Proterosaurus, which superficially resembled a crocodile, and Paraeosaurus, which had extensive armor on its back. Amphibians could not be ignored either. Those belonging to the Rhynsuchus family evolved into specialized ambush predators. Around fresh water, they would eat anything that came too close to the water's edge. Among these, the most lethal was the Eurocentron. It was a giant amphibian reaching 4 meters in length, resembling a giant salamander or crocodile. It was truly the worst place with these monsters living in South Africa, teeming with gorgonopsids and Therocephalians. In Europe and Russia, instead of Uranocentron, the Orangosauroids family took their place. They were slimmer and narrower, but genera like Melosaurus were large enough to reach 3 meters from head to tail. Despite the presence of so many predators, herbivores survived, and quite a number of them thrived. Various herbivores like dicynodonts, paraeosaurs, and captohinids filled the Permian land. One of the most famous herbivores was the dicynodon. Ranging in size from a badger to a pig, they were among the most common animals of the time. They used their strong forelimbs and tusks to dig deep burrows to hide from predators. On the opposite end of the spectrum was the Paraeosaurs. They were animals, like tanks covered in armor. Large bony protrusions embedded in their skin and dense, heavy bones provided additional protection. The most famous among them was Scutosaurus. Weighing 1.2 tons and similar in size to Gorgonopsids, Scutosaurus relied on its nearly impenetrable armor instead of speed. The spikes decorating the skull on the dense muscles further enhanced its defense. The Permian period was wild, but at least there was no need to look up at the sky. Unlike the Mesozoic era, there were no giant flying predators. There were insects like griffin flies and ancient dragonflies, but they were harmless to large animals. The largest flying animal was probably from the Vegetosaurus family. These gliding reptiles, not larger than big bats, only ate insects. The sky was relatively safe. However, during the Leanan period, there was another enemy lurking. It was nature itself. There was a reason why life was mainly concentrated in a few areas like Europe, Russia, and Africa. The vast inland areas of Pangea were uninhabitable. The average temperature was 35 degrees Celsius, twice as hot as it is now. This suffocating heat caused an extremely dry climate, and vast deserts formed near the equator. In the north, the central Permian mountains stretched across the continent, creating drought-prone areas. Surprisingly, this nightmare-like climate was rather mild in the late Permian. About 252 million years ago, it witnessed the worst extinction event in Earth's history. It was the Great Extinction. This cataclysm, initiated by the eruptions of the Siberian traps, covered an area almost the size of Western Europe with volcanic rock. Lava 1 kilometer thick flowed down, and an enormous amount of carbon dioxide and sulfur was emitted. The surface temperature rose even further. The Earth's average temperature was similar to that of Death Valley in the United States, the hottest place on Earth today, all year round. And due to the continuously erupting gases, oxygen decreased rapidly. Even if one could withstand the heat, there was a high possibility of suffocation. Some studies suggest that volcanic eruptions severely damaged the ozone layer, potentially increasing ultraviolet radiation by over 5,000%. The Earth transformed into a completely different planet. Among all the extinction events in Earth's history, the mass extinction at the end of the Permian period was the largest in scale. More than half of the biological groups living on Earth at the time disappeared, and in terms of species, 8 out of 10 were completely extinct. In comparison, the KT extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs, which occurred about 66 million years ago due to a massive meteor impact, resulted in the disappearance of less than 2 out of 10 species. So, calling this period a mass extinction is by no means an exaggeration. The situation on land was terrible, but aquatic life actually suffered more. Rising temperatures and acidification devastated marine ecosystems. However, paradoxically, if you had entered the water during the mass extinction, you wouldn't have been scorched. The temperature of the seawater is estimated to have been hot enough to cause burns if a person entered. The Earth was boiling to that extent, but still, being underwater was slightly better than being on land. The paradox shown during the Lenin period, where land was hell and the sea was a refuge, was repeated even at the moment of the mass extinction. The Renan era came to an end like that. The supercontinent Pangea heated up, and endless volcanic ash poured from the sky. Giant predators like Inostrancevia and Rubigia were defeated not by any creature but by the changes of the Earth. The eruptions of the Siberian traps continued, the atmosphere suffocated, and the seas boiled. And 90% of Earth's life disappeared. However, it was not a complete end. Amidst the ash and dust, some life survived. And those survivors eventually became dinosaurs, mammals, and ultimately us. The Renan era, when the land was hell, ended, but the next world began on that ash. Earth thus closed a chapter of an era.
If you want to see more prehistory like this, hit that subscribe button, join the community for weekly tips on prehistory, subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this series.